Hey guys, my name is Toby and welcome back to another exciting Photoshop tutorial where this time we're going to be taking a look at the new flame filter that Photoshop have just added into Adobe Photoshop CC. Now this can be found under the render tab, and if I just click a layer you'll be able to see that. And because it's under here, I instantly thought that this was going to be awful. I thought, oh no, it's going to be another lens flare instant drag and drop effect that you can see from a mile away. Because I don't know about you, but I can spot a Photoshop lens flare just, matter of seconds. It's like, that's a Photoshop lens flare. Okay. So the flame effect I actually think is quite powerful. It's quite good for doing a lot of things. And I think compared to the old method of having to do things like flame text and anything where you needed to fake fire, I think it's actually quite a passable effect if you use it in the right way. So let's jump straight on in and have a look at it. So before we can do anything, it needs a layer to be applied to. Now you can't do this to a smart object or a bit of text or something like that. It has to be something where you can edit the pixels, and we could do it straight onto our background, but the problem with that is that then it's part of the background, we can't move it around. So I'm just going to make a new layer, and I've just made the background for this black so it's easier to see. It's generally, if you're just trying to do a flame by itself, it's easier to do it onto black. And I'm going to go to the pen tool. Now, before we can apply the filter, it needs a path to be applied to. So we can just come in here and just make a path. And now we can go to Filter, Render, Flame. And instantly, we've kind of got this flame thing. And that doesn't look great. Now, I'm going to put this onto the top option, which is one flame along a path. And we can instantly kind of looks a little bit better. We can change the width, and you can change the complexity. So you can kind of move this around, and you generally want this pretty fairly high, I would imagine, because otherwise they don't look as real. Turbulence, you can turn that up and it will make the flame a bit more turbulent. The jag, it's weird. I find this actually gets kind of more jaggy as you bring it down. It kind of goes a bit more pointy, whereas if you have it all the way up, it's kind of a bit smoother, I think. Anyway, maybe that's just me. The opacity is quite important because it's not the same as doing the opacity after the fact by changing like the layer opacity or something. The way this plugin works, as far as I can tell, is it takes the path you specify, and then based on the settings you put in here, it will make kind of hundreds and hundreds of little brush strokes over and over and over again in this kind of random way automatically. And it's like using a semi-transparent brush normally. So if you paint over it a few times, it's going to build up to the point where you start to get this pure bit of color. So if I put the opacity all the way up, or not all the way, but quite a lot higher, you're going to see that it kind of goes white in the middle, and then towards the edges it's a bit more soft. So this is really controlling at least the way I like to think of it. I could be wrong about this, but behind the scenes, this is controlling the opacity of the brush that is making all of these strokes. So generally speaking, flames aren't completely opaque. So you might want this a little bit lower than you might think. So, something like that's probably pretty good. The flame bottom alignment, basically this is how flat the base of the flame is. So if this is all the way down, it's kind of quite flat. But then if you put it kind of up, then the base of the flame is still kind of about here, but it kind of extends down beyond. So that's quite a useful one. You've got 3 styles to choose from. Normal, which is kind of a bit softer, violent, which is a bit more violent, and the one that I think probably looks the best. And then there's flat, and flat looks a bit most of the time. As you can see, it's not got that pure white. It's got that sort of slightly just not bright enough color in the middle, kind of a bit like if you put the output slider down on a levels adjustment. And you also it's not really done it with this example, but you tend to get like big flat areas of just color where there's no texture at all, and I don't think it's probably very useful, so I like to leave it on violent. You can also do a custom color to your flames, and again, because of the way it kind of works, if you're going to change the color of your flames, this is probably the better point in the process to do it, rather than doing it afterwards with a hue and saturation adjustment, because it seems to give you a slightly more natural set of colors, whereas if you do it with hue and saturation, it doesn't look quite as good, I don't think. And then you've got quality. Now, if you're doing a really long path, it's going to warn you when you start that the path is more than 3,000 pixels and blah, 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 blah. And basically, it won't preview the whole thing. and it will run really, really slowly. Now my laptop, I'm on a MacBook Pro, quite a new one, and it's generally pretty good for most things, but this plugin will make it chug, and I'm sure that unless you've got a really top of the line computer, you're gonna struggle. So if you're doing a really big path, it's probably best to work in draft, because while you're working, it will render quicker. So it's much more responsive as you're editing, and then you can put it up to high or fine later when you want to render it out. Now, we've also got a bunch of different flame types, and the better way for me to explain this is I've made a little document which will show you kind of what they are. So you can have, number one is one flame along a path, and that is just from the start of the path, and these paths are just circle paths. It's completely circular, and it will just create one flame. So if you have this, it's just going to have one big flame, like what we were previewing in our window. You can have multiple flames along a path, and the flames will actually point in the direction of the path. So whichever way the path is kind of going, that's where they'll point. You can have multiple flames with one direction, and you can change the angle of this. So if you wanted them all to point to the right, you could do that. And this is quite a useful one. If you're trying to do a specific effect, so let's say you've got like a line of fire and it's being blown by the wind, and it's you want it to kind of point off to one side, you can use this one to do that. You've got multiple flames path directed. Now what this means is that the flame will be perpendicular to the path. So if it was like a wavy line, they'd kind of be like pointing all kind of up, but relative to which part of the path they're on. And this is the one that I find really useful for doing text with. You can also have multiple flames, various angles, where it's kind of just random angles, and you can kind of change the amount of randomness by using the angle slider. So you still have a control in there called angle, and with most of these other ones, like particularly this one, it will just change the angle they all point. If you change the angle on this one, it's like a randomness setting, if you like. It should really probably be renamed something else, but I think they've just called it angle because of that. And then the last one is candlelight, and this one I think could be very useful if you are trying to mimic candles, and it tends to give a very hot white core compared to the rest, and it's sort of a little bit different, but I think it's probably one of the ones that, to be honest, looks more realistic if you're trying to do like a small flame on something, and I think if you're just doing little tiny paths, this could look pretty good. So you've got quite a lot of different options there to do a lot of powerful things. So let's look at a couple of examples. So let's go back into our untitled document. I'm just going to delete this path, because if you recall, back in the day when you wanted to do flame text, that was quite an undertaking. If you could do flame text, you were cool. And that's because it was hard to do. You had to take, images of flames and either sort of kind of paste them around it, or, sit there and make everything masked out and layer it all up and do all that. And it was just very difficult. And there's probably a couple of quick fixes of doing it by using like generated textures and stuff like that. But again, it's all very complicated. Whereas now, all you need to do is we're going to type something. We're going to type hello explosions, and then we're going to make that white so we can actually see it. I'm just going to drag this in here. Now, make this a bit smaller maybe. All we need to do is we need to get a path from it. So we're going to right click on the layer, and we're going to go create work path. And now we have a path. So now what we can do is we can go to, we need to make a new layer first, and then we need to go to filter, render, flame. And then we can do multiple flames, one direction, let's say. Let's try that. And you probably want to have the length and width quite small if you're doing text generally. And I'm just going to put this onto draft so we can actually kind of do this a bit quickly, because we are trying to do a short episode here. And let's just bring this right the way down. Right the way down, he said. For some reason, the minimum length is 20. I don't know why that is. And maybe we can turn the interval down so we get less gaps. The interval is just how spaced out each flame is when you're doing one of these multiple flame settings. Adjust interval for loops. So if we tick that on, hopefully that should make that a little bit more even. Maybe we can turn the width down. Maybe they'll make that like 25, let's say. Okay, so we're starting to get somewhere. Maybe turn the opacity up to make it look a little bit brighter. Okay, that's pretty good. We'll just have it parallel flames, I think. And you know, I could spend more time on this, and now this is probably going to take a while to render, so join me back in a second once this has finished. Okay, so that took a couple of seconds there to render, so we'll just jump back in. Right, so if we just select our path, you can see we now have a nice bit of text that says hello explosions. I must admit, I haven't made that particularly legible. Sometimes this will take a little bit of finessing, but again, this is definitely quicker and easier than trying to do it any other way that I can think of. So, moving on, let's look at another real-world example. We've got the shot from the Nürburgring here, and this is something that I took when I was on holiday last year. But let's say we want to make this car a little bit more awesome. So, I'm going to hit P for the pen tool, and I'm just going to click. Before I do that, I'm going to make a new layer so I don't forget. Go to our paths. And we'll just delete that and start again. So I'm going to click and I'm going to drag that out. And I'm going to click kind of where I think the back wheel would be. And then draw that out. And now I've got this line in the middle that we don't want. So a little quick way to get rid of that is I'm going to click and I'm just going to delete that point I've just made. And now I've got two separate lines. Okay. So onto our new layer. We're going to go to Filter, Render, Flame. And we've already got some Back to the Future-esque tyre marks. So we've got that. Now, I think we probably want multiple flames one direction. And we're going to make them a little bit longer. And a little bit wider. Maybe a little bit less wide. Maybe a little bit less wide still. Okay. And now we want to change the angle. That's pretty close, I think. There we go. So they're kind of been blown backwards a little bit. Maybe we'll turn the length down slightly as well. Maybe a bit more. And you notice how I have randomized length ticked here. Now this is because if we don't have that ticked, you kind of get this weird uniform line, and we actually want it to have some texture to it. So I think that looks pretty good, particularly at the ends there. I think that looks pretty awesome. And I'm not going to really mess with too much anymore in here, but you know, you can play with this if you want. The arrangement is kind of like a seed, if you're familiar with that at all. It's just a way of kind of changing, you know, kind of what it looks like, just applying a random setting to it if you're not happy with exactly how it's rendered. And yeah, let's go with that. I'm going to click OK, and then hopefully that's not going to take too long. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect our path, just so that's not in the way anymore. I'm going to turn this off temporarily. And then with our background layer select, I'm going to go to the quick select tool, which is W on the keyboard. And I'm just going to drag around this car. Just kind of get the rough shape of it. It doesn't need to be too precise. I'm just going to make sure I kind of get all that as well. And just there. Okay. Now I'm going to turn our fire back on. I'm going to click on our fire with our selection. And I'm going to hit the mask tool. And now I'm going to hit Command I with the mask selected to invert it. And that's done a pretty good job. I'm just going to come in here and fix this a little bit though. Because I think we can do a little bit better. Just around that bit. And yeah, that's pretty good. Now, I want to come in here and I want to play with the blend mode a bit to make this look a little bit more realistic. So maybe screen is going to be pretty good. And then let's add a levels adjustment. And we're going to just hit Command-Alt-G to clip that so it's only affecting our fire. Maybe we'll just play with some of the colors on here. And you want to use blend mode rather than opacity to make this blend, because if you change the opacity, it's just going to go a bit wishy-washy. Oh, that's the levels adjustments. If you do that, it just kind of looks a bit rubbish because you're taking that intensity out of it. You want to keep that kind of bright intensity, but not too much. And the thing is, because we've now, this is basically just pixels now, you know, if we're not happy, I think that maybe looks like it could bend around more, so we could maybe go into liquify. and just kind of... No, maybe not. I'm going to mess that up and that'll take too long to fix. But you get the idea. You can play with this with any kind of adjustment now. So let's maybe add a hue and saturation. And that's clipped as well. And then maybe we'll just do that. And then let's think. The only other thing that's missing is it's kind of got a lot of motion blur on it. So we're going to go to filter. And then we're going to go to blur and motion blur. And let's just have a look here. So needs to be kind of that direction. Now you just turn that up a little bit and hit OK. And aside from that being really too straight, which is now starting to annoy me a bit, you can see how very quickly we've added a relatively cool effect. Now you could come in here and you could add glows and things like that to make it look like the fire's actually on there. Maybe you could add some smoke coming off this as well. But just for the purpose of this little demo, I think you can kind of see the direction you could start to take this in. And of course, if you didn't want to do something as sensible as this, you could always go a little bit mad with a portrait and maybe just put some fire in someone's eyes. So I think that is going to do it for this time, guys. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Toby, and you've been watching me Photoshop things. Bye-bye.